Okay, before we dive into analyzing part of Bach's French Suite number 1, the Allemande, that's what we're going to be looking at. I need to talk about augmented 6 chords because that's why we're looking at it in terms of like for college courses, second years, in mid-year, learn about exotic chords like the Neapolitan and then the augmented chords, augmented 6 chords. And what these are is, we're going to call them predominants. This is my explanation of this really quick. Predominant chords, so they replace 6 4s and 2s, and they go to the 5 chord. They go to dominant chords. And they feature sharp 4 scale degree and flat 6 scale degree. They're usually found in minor keys, which gives them the flat 6 already. And because they're predominant, that's going to go to 5 in my 5 chord that's coming up, and that's going to go to 5. And their key feature then is that they have 2 leading tones like this. And if they have other notes in them, they can have other leading tones going to other places too. Like for instance, another feature of all of these predominants is to have scale degree 1 or the tonic note in them too. And that's going to go down to 7 scale degree. This is my 5 chord. You can hear what that sounds like. So if I just put myself in, let's say C minor, right? And if I go immediately to an augmented 6 chord with those in there, it's going to sound like this. It's going to sound like, right? And this is sharp 4 is going to go up to here, and flat 6 is going to go down to here, and 1 is going to come down to there. So it's, and then resolve. And once you see these and hear them, you'll have a hard time not noticing them when they come up. There's variants on this. There's one called the Italian, which is exactly this. There's one called the French, which has, in addition to this, it has scale degree 2 in it. And then there's one called German, which in addition to this basic thing, if we just take these and skip 2, that was French, augmented 6. This was Italian, augmented 6. Names aren't really relevant other than they got given names, but the German one, German augmented 6, is this plus flat 3, right? And so first off, you need to be able to find that. And the way we go looking for it in music is we look for these 2 notes right here. Because this may be in the key signature if you're in a minor key already, the flat 6, but often it's not because you can change keys. And then we look for sharp 4. Sharp 4 could also be part of like a 5 of 5 or a 7 of 5 or something like that as well. So it's not always the case that this means you have it, but when you find these 2 together, you'll find these, and you look at them, you look for them just before they go to a 5 chord, okay? And then you can play all kinds of shenanigans with them. If you can have a 5 of 5, you can have a German of 5 too, and stuff like that. So they can be part of secondary or applied tonicization as well. That's all great. Good. But what we want to talk about is a rare version of this, where it's not predominant, where it becomes a substitute dominant. And for this, we have to talk about tritone substitution, which is usually thought of as a jazz thing. So first off, I just want to spell you a German chord for a minute. Again, if we're in the key of C minor, okay, then flat 6 is A flat, 1 is C, and flat 3, to make it German, is E flat, and then sharp 4 is going to be F sharp, right there. And like I said, that's my augmented 6 interval right there. And if you've studied music theory and you can spell your chords, you know that this is the same thing as this because of enharmonic spelling. And that equals A flat dominant 7, which is a 5/7 chord. Sound. Okay, so yeah, so they have the same notes in their tritone right here, between here and here, that push you to your one chord, which is what the 5/7 does. Okay, so first off, let's just review. Augmented 6 chords are special, exotic, chromatic chords that have extra leading tones that take you to the 5. They're usually predominant. You find them by finding scale degree flat 6, 1, sharp 4, and then possibly some other notes to get the variance of them, and you see them going to 5 chords. And it could be like a 1/6/4 going to 5, or a 5/7 or something like that too. And if you look at the German in particular, when you spell it, we can find out that it is in fact the same thing as a misspelled dominant 7 chord. Okay? All right. So we could mistake them, or they would sound the same. Okay? They both have this sound. Whether you call this F sharp or G flat, right? Okay. So now we have to talk about tritone substitution. I feel like it's time to change colors. Let's talk about tritone substitution. Tritone substitution is something that we talk about in jazz a lot. So if I have 5 and I'm going to, well, let's just say 1 right there, okay? And I'm in the key of, well, we'll just make it C major this time, right? 5/7. Then that's G, B, D, F. That's my 5/7 chord, right? And this is C, E, G, right? And the F and the B push us to the notes in the 1 chord right there. They're called tendency tones. Leading tone, and then from above there, they have a tendency to push us towards there. And that's why the 5 chord sounds like that. Okay? So in what we call tritone substitution is this really crazy thing, where if you take another 5/7 that is a tritone, and when we say tritone, we mean an augmented 4th or diminished 5th, has the same name. Tritone means 3 whole steps, which is an augmented 4th or diminished 5th. It's actually halfway through. Okay, so tritone substitute. You take the 5/7 that is a tritone away from there. Okay, tritone, again, diminished 5th, or augmented 4th. So let's think about this for a minute. If G is our 5 chord right here, right, and we can use that. Now let's calculate our 5/7 form of a chord that is a tritone away from there. So that would be a C sharp chord or a D flat chord, depending on how you want to call that. But both of those are same names for 3 whole steps away, or a tritone away. Let's build ourselves a D flat 7 chord. Okay, that would be D flat, F, A flat, and C flat. Now I just want to point something out here. This note right here that was doing work to push us to there, that's right there. It's in the other spot, it's on the 3rd rather than 7th, but it's there, okay, pushing us forward. And this note right here that was the 3rd, the B, is right there. It's called C flat, but it's the same thing. In other words, the active sonic ingredients in these 2 chords are the same, pushing us forward. And then this looks like a flat 5, and this looks like a flat 9, right? And so, and what's, you know, this is like an altered chord, or a jazzy chord. Like if I played this chord and stuck the G underneath it, first off, I'll play this, right? Here's my, right? Sounds like a dominant 7 chord, could be used in jazz as well, right? But if I keep that there and I stick this chord on top, right, it has the same important notes, these 2 right here, right? But these other ones. And it makes this really crunchy, wonderful sound because of the chromatic alterations and extensions. Flat 9 right there, and flat 5 right there. And in jazz, sometimes they just call them altered chords. But jazz composers and songwriters today that have that in their toolbox would say instead of a 5-1, if they wanted something that had more teeth or more flavor to it, they would use the tritone substitute version of that. Okay, and that's what we use in modern writing today. Well, in Baroque and classical and romantic music, common practice period, they do this. In other words, this jazz technique was figured out a long time ago, way before jazz. And how did they do this? Well, they did it like this. They said, German is like a dominant 7. And your tritone substitution, see D flat going to the C chord as opposed to G going to the C chord, is a half step above the C chord. In other words, to do a tritone substitution, you just don't use the 5-7. You use a dominant 7 chord that's a half step above the chord you're going to, right? Well, they would just do this there. They would put a German chord, not in the key that you're in, but of the scale degree, in this case 1, right? And what they'd say is, what's 1? Well, if it was C, then you'd say German of that would start right there. And you'd build that instead, right? And they'd use it not as a predominant, but as a secondary or applied dominant to whatever they're going to. I don't know how clear that was. We have it in class. We draw this on the board and things like that. But I want to analyze the Allemande, at least the beginning of the Allemande from French Suite number 1 by Bach, because it's there. And it shows that Bach was using these fully formed concepts, way back in the Baroque period. And in that way, he's sort of like, early jazz musician. All right, so just in case you're wondering what suites are, inventions are 2-part short contrapuntal pieces that he wrote. There's 15 of them. And, they have a beginning and then they start to move to the dominant, kind of like a fugue might do, except they're not fugues. And then they wrap around and stuff, and eventually they come back to their home key after leaving. Symphonias are 3-part inventions. The well-tempered clavier are all the preludes and fugues and things that we've seen and analyzed and things before. The suites are collections of short stylized dances that come out of the Renaissance. Allemande, minuet, gigue, passe-pied, usually French, most of them. They have certain styles about them. These aren't made for dancing to, but they contain the essence of those things, and they write them. They're short little binary pieces. They start in an A section. Usually there's repeats there, and the job is to go from home key to either the dominant key or the dominant chord, sometimes the relative major if they're in minor. And then the B part is just to get us back home to 1, right? Or 1 if we're in minor, okay? But they have a lot of commonalities. Now, we don't often analyze the suites in symphonias because we're less familiar with them. The well-tempered clavier is very, very popular, all the preludes and the fugues, and this is sort of like the gold standard of like fantastic contrapuntal or multi-melodied counterpoint pieces by Bach. The inventions are wonderful, and they're easy enough because they're 2-part that they start creeping into intermediate piano and keyboard method books. And then maybe if you continue on, if you persist, you might do some symphonias, but the suites kind of, I don't know, they get lost. They are 3 parts. They're contrapuntal, meaning that they have lots of different lines, well, usually 3 different lines running through them at the same time. And he tends to do a lot of shifty things with where non-chord tones and things are, which makes them really hard to analyze. So in the second year, we're looking at this because we want to get a start on this. At some point in your music education, if you go on as music major, you'll take a form and analysis class, and if you're lucky, you'll take a counterpoint class, probably in the Baroque manner, and you'll have to analyze these pieces. So here's the suite right here. You can see most of it here. you can see that this is just so much more difficult visually than a chorale, where you kind of go, there's a chord, and there's a chord, and there's a chord. But if you can get good at sort of seeing some of the tips and tricks that are going on in here in terms of how he's making extra dissonances by lots of non-chord tones, holding over into the next chord and distorting what it sounds like to give us more tension and release. And if you know a little bit about Bach's writing, then there are some tips and tricks that we can do. So the first tip or trick that I want to talk about is actually from a different piece that a lot of people like. It's much simpler. It's the Prelude and Fugue from from the Well-Tempered Clavier. I think this is number 1. And one of the things we learned from this, because it's all the same texture all the way through, is that Bach will often give us the first 4 measures as an expositional phrase. It sort of tells us what the piece is about. And so in here, these are all really clear to see the chords, but this is, we're in the key of C, and this is a 1 chord, it's a C chord, and it repeats itself. And then here, it's a D, A, F, and it's over a C, right? A, D, F, right? That kind of thing. This is my 2 chord, and you can think of this as a pedal, or you can think of it as a 7, right? Right, so you put figured bass there, and 2s like to go to 5s, and look here, we have a G and a B, a G and a B and a D and another D and an F, right? So this is my 5-7 right here, and this is the 3rd in the bass, so we have to use that for there. And then when we come out of this 4 measure phrase, it's almost always 4 measures, we come back around to a 1 chord right there, like that, and we have this imperfect, authentic cadence. But this sort of says, hi, we're in the key of C, and this is what our piece is about. This is the texture, and these are the things that are going on. So when you deal with these suites and their dance pieces, you can find a lot of similar things. So this is the first half of it. There's a second half right here. But I kind of want to show you what's going on here. And it's not apparent visually, but I'll put this out for you. We indeed actually have a 1, 2, 3, 4 measure phrase that comes to a stop right there. Now there is a little bit of a cadential extension that goes afterwards, meaning it kind of repeats itself. Cadential extension sort of keeps going, but this starts a 2 measure sequence idea that we will see again on the next part right here. 2 measure sequence, right? Here as well. And this is very typical. So he establishes himself, and then he says it's time to go, and they start to go off into other keys, usually using sequences. And so that's to there. And if you had time, you could find that they're very similar if you look at their rhythms, textures, and ideas. They're not identical perfectly because he often will do things like invert. See, this one's going down and that one's going up, right? That kind of thing. But a lot of the same stuff going on. Rhythmically, it's very similar, and you can hear it when it's played that there's a relationship between the two. And once that's done, we get a little half bar sequence right here that's done again, and then we charge to a cadence. And when we're done our cadence, this one started in the key of D minor. You see these A's right here. This is telling us that we're on the 5 right there, and you'll find a nice 5 chord right there, an A major chord. Okay, so if you can start to have expectations about the form and what it's doing, sort of an expositional, here's what we're about, it's going to take us from the 1 chord probably to the 1 chord again, and then we're going to use sequential mechanisms to take us to other keys, and then maybe more sequences or ideas, and then finally drive to cadences at the end. Then we're in good shape. Now, all we want to do is we want to look at these first 4 measures, because the goal of this for second-year students is primarily to find this funky German chord that's not the one from the key that's acting as a dominant substitute, being a tritone substitute for these other things, okay? And also for us to get a little bit of, how would you say, like experience on how we start to decipher these more complex structures, okay? So, gosh, it's 20 minutes in and we're finally getting to this 4 measures. Sorry about that if you just came for the Bach. This is in D minor. And an allemande is a dance that's moderately slow in tempo, but has these running dee da dee da dee da dee da, these little footstep things in here. Okay, so D minor. And typical that we would find this D right here, and you can see there's a D there. And this is going to be my one chord right here. And if you think D, F, A, right? Well, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, not chord tones. Chord tone, not chord tone. And it really just says, you know, here's our key and our opening idea. Right? And then let's just not get too complicated. What comes after that? Well, after a one chord, the most basic thing you can do is some kind of dominant or five chord, or seven for that matter. And so let's take a look at this. We have a C sharp and a B flat and an E and a G. Now, this D is persisting, but it's not part of the chord. It's a pedal tone. This is common in these kind of pieces where they'll, lots of pieces actually, where you put the tonic note or the key note here and you hold it out for a while and it clashes against these things, but it's saying, look, we're at the beginning of the piece and you got to remember what key you're in. Similarly, at the end of the pieces, you will find that when they've shifted to the, or they're coming back around or they shifted to the dominant, you'll see right here that this is the dominant or five note right there being held out regardless of what's going on in the chords above it too. And it's signaling we're on the five chord, which could either mean the end of a suite, first half of movement, or if it was an invention or a chorale or something like that, or, you know, prelude, it would hold it out saying we're about to go back to the tonic or the home key, right? Okay, so that one's pretty easy. If we take this and go C sharp, E, G, B flat, right? So this is a one chord right here. Then this is a C sharp diminished seven chord, which is the seven chord to the one. So seven, diminished seven. We don't worry about inversion numbers when we have the pedal on the bottom, okay? But look what happens. That goes down there. And then when you get rid of the B flat and it becomes an A, then this becomes a 5, 7. That's the difference between the two chords. If the B flat comes down to the A and becomes the root here, then the 7 diminished morphs into a 5, 7. So you get that original opening and it goes. And then you hear this, and it's still, you know, against there, but you got to remember to discount the D, right? It's a cool sound. Right? And there's my 7. And then it slips this alto note down, and then we should be coming back to this chord right here. 1 again, and we do. There's a D that's been held over. This C sharp goes to the D. There's my A, there's my A, and there's my F. But notice that on the beat here, we get another non-chord tone. So just like this became a non-chord tone and clashed with this G from before that's getting repeated clashes with the DFA chord here to make it sound like not quite finished, because this is the contrapuntal texture that's moving forward. So I'm just going to play through here, and you can hear that when we get there, the arrival back to the D chord is sort of blunted a bit, right? So we went, now we get our 7 diminished, right? And that goes to the A7. And when we get our resolution back here, it's blunted by the G on top. Right? And then, but by the time we get to here, you can hear that, oh, we've got a cat that thinks something important's going on, okay? No sooner does that happen, and by the way, this is part of the chord. I'm circling chord tones instead of non-chord tones. Part of the chord, 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 not part of the chord. Right? It's just like this was not part of the chord either. He's got this idea here, right? But then we look here and we get this new sound right there, okay? And this is a D and a G and a B flat and an E. And I'm just going to speed us along through here. That's a E, G, B flat, D. That's a half diminished 7 chord. And half diminished 7 chords are usually 2 chords in minor, and in fact in the key of D minor, E is the 2 chord right there. So we've got a 2 half diminished 2 chord, like the inversion is 2 right there, right? Okay, and normally we would expect that to go to 5, okay? Which kind of does and it kind of doesn't. I'll explain in a minute. This is highly dissonant. Even though it makes a chord, this is a very dissonant note. And it kind of feels like it's a suspension that comes down to here. Funny enough, if you got rid of the D and turned it into this C right there, then this becomes, including that there, a C7 chord, right? And that would be like the 5 of 3. This is like my subtonic, that's not going to show up very well. My subtonic 7. So which is it? Subtonic 7, right? Which is the 5, 7 of 3, which is my relative major, which is F. Okay, so, well, let's listen in our ears, right? Let's go from here, and you can say, does it sound like a half diminished? Or does it sound like a C chord dominant of the 3? Okay, so I'm just going to go from there. And then we get this. And then we go. And I hear it as the C7, kinda. I hear it as the 2 diminished, half diminished as well. Interestingly though, we get both of the resolutions. So if this is a C7, it should go to an F chord. But look, we have a C, an E, an A, and an E. This is an A minor chord, right? Which is not what we should be expecting off of a C7. However, if we're in the key of D minor, A minor is the 5 chord. It's a minor chord, but it's still, right? So this here is supposed to resolve to that, and it does, right? And this here, but wait, there's more. Then it picks up the F there and the A and the C. So here's my 3 chord right there. So this here is supposed to resolve to that, and it does. So he's doing both, which is pretty cool. We haven't even gone to the German chord yet, but you hear this, right? And that's going to resolve over at the A minor chord to here, like this, right? Or you have the C7 version of that, which is this, right? And it resolves over to here, right? Right? It does both. And then if you're going, but 5 should be major and they should have C sharp in the leading tone, it picks it up right there, right? So you get this in the end too, which still feels like a 5 chord, proper one, going over to the 1, okay? So tricky, very cool, okay? But you see how we have to be thoughtful. It could be multiple things here. We have to be careful, and we have to not let our ears get distracted by dissonance, right? Things being held over. Like here, for instance, 5 should go to 1 right here, and 1 is D minor. And it's true we have a D and an A and an F right there, and that's going to be fine. But because Bach stacks in a B flat right there, this is going to sound like a B flat D chord, which is going to sound like my 6 chord. It's going to sound like a deceptive cadence or a deceptive progression, right? You can hear it with a non-chord tone stuck in there for good fun. So if I play from here like that, I have this, and then my F chord, right? And then I'm picking up the C sharp, which says we should be going to a 1 chord equals surprise, right? Nice, beautiful 6 chord with the major 7th, and then as it picks up, it shifts to the 1 chord. So seems like a 6, but if you take the next resolution right there, that feels like a 1 chord right there, 1 6. So which is it? Did it go to this one or this one? The answer is kind of yes. And he creates more dissonance because the B flat's in contrast there, and when it moves to the B flat there, then he decides to move down there, causing another dissonance there, making this whole thing like highly suspicious. Like if I were trying to coach somebody to write counterpoint, I'd be like, you realize you went from one dissonance into another dissonance, and that's probably a problem. Bach just doubles down so that his next resolution is even better. So he destabilizes this whole thing. You get a moment of glorious 6 major 7 right there, and then it's like oops, 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 and then it lands and it becomes really great. So here's my 6th chord with the 7th on it, and then as it goes up to the non-chord tone, the resolution down to the A makes that chunkier, and then that should go to a right, which is nice. This is basically a G minor chord, which is going to be my 4, right? And then here you could say it's all part of the 4, and that's not a chord tone, but it comes into this right there, and that kind of feels like a C chord, right? Which would be my subtonic 7 again, right there, right? Kinda, right? And then here's an interesting thing. This looks like a 1-6-4. So remember that A is my dominant, and a 1-6-4 is a cadential thing where you put the D chord right with the A underneath it, and that resolves down to the A with the A underneath it chords. And so you can see that it kind of is doing that because you've got the D above the A right there. It's like a 1-6-4 and then a 5, and this goes down to the 7th, but then it's kind of funky. It looks like it's moved into a G major chord, you know, but he's using the melodic minor in reverse here. I don't know if we want to call that a G major chord or not. You could. It would be 5 of subtonic 7. I don't know if that's necessary or not. Okay. And then here, where we should go, you know, it should be a D chord right here, and it is D, F sharp, A, C. He has given us a 5 of, like an applied dominant. So this is a 1 chord, but it becomes 5-7, well 6-5 at that point, of 4, right? And so we would expect this here to go to 4, and it does. G, G, B flat, but see the C is held over there, blunting the approach. Okay, so it's complicated. It's really much, much, much more complicated than the prelude in C that we were looking at. And we're finally here now. So this becomes, I'm just going to play through these and call this out. We're going to go from here. We get our 6th chord, right? And then our kind of weird 1, which then goes to the 4 chord, right? And that feels like a C chord there, and then 1-6-4, 5, strange G thing, or maybe it's just wandering down through and he's gone down to the 7th of the 5 chord. And then we come to this, right? It's a very chunky note to fall into right there, but then you know, it's another unstabilizing or destabilizing dissonance. And then it comes to here, and it should be sudden we get this weird chord on beat 2 right here. Okay, and that's it right there. So we're gonna pause for a second and just identify some things here. German augmented 6 chords have a sharp 4, and they look like a dominant 7 chord, not necessarily in a key that you would know, but they look like a major triad with a minor 7th, where the 7th is misspelt to be an augmented 6. So let's take a look at this. E flat, G, B flat, C sharp. Okay. If we were to spin this around and call this a D flat instead, we would have E flat, G, B flat, D flat. Okay. But it's not a 5-7 chord, it's a German chord, right? It's the wrong German for the key. The German in this key would be B flat, D, F, and then G sharp. This is not right, okay? And also its position is wrong because we're heading into a cadence right here. What we find here is that this here is a substitute for the 5 chord. Okay, let me spell the 5 chord for you. That would be A, C sharp, E, and G. Yes, and these would be the 2 important notes that drive this, and that one's there, and that one's there. And this is a half step above the 1 chord that it's going to. So this is German Augmented 6 of scale degree 1, which tells us that it's acting as a dominant substitute. It's a tritone substitute. It's a jazz chord. And then it should go to 1, but instead he takes this and lowers this E flat, or brings it up to the E, and takes this B flat from here down to the A, and now we have an A, C sharp, E, G. So this is my A7 chord right there. So he uses both. This is my tritone sub, right? German Augmented 6 of 1 that should be substituting for this, and then it goes to be a 5, 7. This has got second inversion like that, and then comes to my 1, 6 right there, like that, giving us an imperfect authentic cadence. Very similar to the prelude from in C that we looked at the very beginning. Wow. I'm sorry if you, like, I guess this video is what it is on its own. If you came here going like, oh, I think we'll enjoy some late Bach, analysis or something like that, this has clearly gone into the weeds, and it's looking for something specific. And you didn't get that, so maybe you didn't make it this far and you just clicked off, and that's fine. This is for primarily to show second students 2 things. 1, we've talked about German's augmented 6 chords as not just being predominants, but special forms of them can be like dominants, and they're a tritone away from the actual dominant, which is a jazz thing called tritone substitution. And we found one in the wild right here. Clear all the way back, not in some crazy music by Strauss or Mahler or something like that, or Berlioz, but not even in Beethoven or Brahms or something, but way back, pre-classical right here, like that, okay? Yeah, so there we go. And the next thing is, hopefully, just by virtue of saying, ignore this, do that, look at these here, we start to get at least, we can make use of the information that's here to give us the chords, okay? Generally, Bach destabilizes the surface by putting non-chord tones clashing against chord tones to sort of blunt the arrival of the chords, but conversely, he uses really strong progressions like 1, 7, 5, 1, right there again, right? And then 2, 5, and then like a 6 chord, right? Or 5 of 3, 3, right? And then 3 goes to 6, which would be circle of fifths, right? So, 1 going down to 4 is a circle of fifths, 4 going down to 7 is a circle of fifths, right? So he uses strong, like chord progressions, and that allows him to be fuzzy with dissonance because the structure locks in regardless of how much the surface stuff plays with funny sounds. All right. Yeah, I think the next thing I'll do, we'll probably be back to a Bach chorale or something like that. But this is for general interest to people, and like I said, for second years that are trying to figure out how to deal with contrapuntal textures and where do we find this fabled like pseudo-dominant that you've been told about, but excerpts are hard to find. All right.